first of all, let me, on behalf of CGCC, I would like to express our sincere appreciation to Governor O'Malley, and thank you. And also, I don't know, which title you want me to use. Yeah, and Admiral Dennis Blair, for taking your valuable time to join us here today for this SelectUSA reception. As we originally published, unfortunately, Ambassador Barkas couldn't join us here today because he got a COVID yesterday. And I had a communication with him yesterday. He's doing great, other than, his wife will probably give him a little hard time. Everything else is okay. So he just wanted, he actually sent his best regard to everybody here. He feels sorry that he couldn't join us, but he say he's here with us in spirit. So anyway, if I recall correctly, CGCC officially started about 11 years ago. I remember I was invited here to, giving a speech as well, not at the CGCC conference. And obviously, in the last 11 years, the world has changed. So using the old Chinese phrase, Peter, I'm going to test you on that. 三座大山. So we got the new 3 bigger mountains in front of us. The first one is inflation. The second one is Ukraine war. The third one is the famous US-China relationship. So, we may never know, frankly speaking, what could happen on the other side of those mountains. But I don't think we have a choice but moving forward. And to many of our members here today, 11 years ago, SelectUSA was a slogan and also a goal. But today, surviving USA, unfortunately, I have to be honest, that this is not too public, so I'm going to be very direct. So today, surviving USA is more as a reality and a challenge. So fortunately, we have 2 great leaders here joining us, and will give us good advice. And I'm sure, their wisdom will shed light for our future. So first of all, let's give a round of applause to our 2 speakers for them to give us their opening remark. Let's welcome them. And I'm a lazy moderator, so I didn't take the time to go through their introduction. And obviously, if you look at on the CGCC website, you will see that. And those 2 gentlemen have wonderful, profound career achievement. So if you guys all want to have a dinner here, lunch here, whatever here tomorrow, we can keep on and on. But for this panel discussion, I'm going to skip that. And so, Governor.
I go first, okay. Well, it's a great honor to be with you, Pinni. Thank you for having me. My name is Martin O'Malley. I am the former governor of the state of Maryland. And Maryland. All right. Did that mean you're all from Maryland?
Yeah, you're going to run again, right?
Yeah. Yeah, might encourage me. Don't do that. And prior to that, I was the mayor of Baltimore, land of the free, home of the brave. Some Baltimore people. And in 2016, I actually had the audacity and the nerve to run for president of the United States. I was one of 3 people. I'm sorry about the way it worked out, but you never know until you try. And I tried. And during that campaign, in a year in America that was defined really by a lot of anger and a lot of fear in the electorate about a rapidly changing global economy, I did my very best in the time I had on that stage to articulate a more hopeful, more optimistic future, not one that we should fear, but rather one that we should embrace. Not a future of isolation, but a future of international collaboration, which is really the longer arc of the American character. not to fear the world, but to engage with the world. This generation of Americans is not the first one to face global challenges, global threats, unpredictability, war, famine, and all of those other changes, including the advent of a third industrial revolution, the coming together of new technologies in renewable energy, in communications, and in transportation that totally upend the way things had been for 40 or 60 years. Now, we have a decision to make in every nation on this planet. Do we want to make our children winners in this changing economy, or do we want to embrace the past and therefore make them losers in a changing economy? As governor of Maryland, I followed what was an established tradition of Maryland governors who chose to engage with China. In fact, Governor Harry Hughes from Maryland back in the late 70s was the first governor from any of the states in the United States to travel to China after normalization and lead a trade delegation there. Subsequent governors were the first governor that made Maryland the first state to open a trade office, a state trade office in Beijing. And during my time, I did everything in my power, including traveling to China, fostering the sister state relationship between Maryland and the province of Anhui in order to advance international collaboration. Will disagreements exist? Sure. Will nations have disagreements about trade policy? Absolutely. But none of that can stop or prevent the spinning of a world that only spins forward, and the ability of states to engage with one another at the subnational level in order to create positive economic relationships on both sides of the globe. So that's what we sought to advance in healing not only our planet by embracing the winning energy source of the future, renewable energy, but also looking for other opportunities for cooperation in biotechnology, in healing not only our world, but also healing humanity from those things that ail us. So in conclusion, I wanted to add this perspective to the panel, which is that for all of the international unpredictability, states in the United States play a critically important role in creating landing zones and creating greater predictability in the variety of different tax incentives, workforce incentives, and other incentives that allow business people to look at any place in the United States, any one of those states, as a place where they can do business, where they can invest, where they can create opportunities on both sides of the globe. Xie xie. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to be a little more, I think, pessimistic and I think realistic. There's been a lot of happy talk you've heard, but this is a difficult time, both for American companies trying to do business in China and for Chinese companies that are trying to do business in the United States, and we can't sugarcoat that. And those of you in this audience know as well as I do the reason for this state of affairs and how we got here. It grows out of this growing geopolitical rivalry between the United States and China, previously generally confined to the diplomatic, the military, the policy areas, but now overflowing into the finance, into the business and trade areas. When I was Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Command back 20 years ago, I would speak to business groups, either the American Chamber in Beijing, or I don't think I ever talked to your group, but what I told them, which I firmly believe, is that those of us who were wearing the uniform and building the armed forces, directing the armed forces that would defend our countries, it was best in U.S.-Chinese relations if we sort of did that quietly below the surface, and we're not appearing in the news much, but really providing a stable geopolitical background so that those of you who are in business could really add to the relationship between the United States and China. My business at that time was a win-lose business, I got to tell you. Somebody won, somebody lost. Your business is a win-win business, right? There has to be a buyer, has to be a seller. Both have to agree to it. And I think the more the win-wins and the less we highlight and emphasize the military rivalries, better. But we don't have control over that. That sort of goes as it goes, based on decisions in the governments of both countries, based on popular opinion and so on. And you business leaders and your counterparts who are trying to do, Americans who are trying to do business in China are really caught in this crossfire that's going on now and has been doing nothing but getting more intense in recent years. So what do you do? How do you operate in those circumstances? I can't tell you a lot about how you operate on a day-to-day business in your company's sector. You know that better than I do, but let me give you a few general ideas that might be useful to you. Now, there are many American laws and regulations that affect Chinese companies that do business in the United States. And if you follow this, as I'm sure you do, there are more and more being proposed by more members of Congress all the time. Some of them pass, some of them don't. But it's difficult to keep track of all of it. But underneath it all, there are really two basic concerns in the United States that you all, as Chinese businesses investing or doing their activities, selling goods and services in our country, have to deal with. The first one are military concerns, really close national security concerns. And the United States government is working its way to a position, and it's mostly there, in which it will review all investments in U.S. companies that supply military or dual-use technology, and will review any business activity in the United States by a Chinese company that has some kind of a connection providing goods and services to the People's Liberation Army. Those are the two tripwires that are going to bring up a lot of close scrutiny by our government of your investment and your activities if you're that kind of a company, and you're going to have to navigate that. The second one are human rights concerns, and to put that in its simplest thing, the United States government will review any business activity in the United States by any Chinese company that provides goods and services to the Chinese Ministry of Public Security. That's just the basis of it. So these two fundamental concerns in the United States are what affect whether your company, you're connected to a parent company, connected to sister companies in China, can actually come in and do business in the United States, and you're going to have to navigate that. Now, the safest sector to be in view of these two categories that I talked about, are the consumer sector in the United States or business-to-business operations that are strictly in the private sector, and those should be pretty straightforward. But even if part of your business relates to these two other areas, military security concerns or human rights concerns, specific questions have to be answered and specific decisions have to be made. And so I would, in addition to thinking about this fundamental reason, I would strongly recommend, and I'm sure you do it already, that if you're considering doing business in the United States, expanding business in the United States, that you engage one of these American law firms that follows this stuff closely and can advise you on sort of the latest form of any regulation, its interpretation, any law that you see. Or, of course, you heard from Mr. Bizio of Commerce Department, who, with the SelectUSA program, is open to answer all of your questions and tell you if there are any obstacles that you have to surmount. So, in addition to being careful on the fundamentals, you need some professional help, I think, to go through this. So that's sort of for the short term, doing your business here in this country. For the longer term, though, I would really call on the Chinese and American business leaders Americans that are trying to do a business in China, Chinese that are trying to do business in the United States, to talk about the obstacles you face with each other, and then to go back to your own governments and talk some sense to them about the policies that they can both pursue in their own countries that will satisfy the legitimate security concerns, which are true both in China and in the United States, but which will allow all of the benefits of business trade that we've talked about so eloquently here. Because there are large gray areas in the application of laws and regulations, both by China and by the United States. We all know that laws and regulations can be enforced either very tightly or more loosely. And I think we should advise our governments to take a more restricted, more careful approach. The interpretation of what is of military significance should be narrow, not broad and undefined, both in China and in the United States. And frankly, both the Chinese and the American governments take some pretty wide definitions of what constitutes national security, which makes it pretty difficult for somebody trying to do business to do. And we need to narrow that, and we need to make it clear and consistent. Both governments should provide greater clarity. White lists, for example. Why not tell people what they can do rather than asking them to do something and say, nah, you can't do that. Nah, I don't like that one either. You know, let's have some clarity from both governments in terms of what is allowed so that companies know where to drive. And certainly consistency is very important. So businessmen from both countries know what sort of concerns exist in the governing bodies in each country and how they will be interpreted on a day-to-day basis. And I think these messages back to our own governments are more effective in China if they come from Chinese business leaders, and I know they're more effective in the United States if they come from American business leaders who are trying to do this. So my advice for the long term for those of you in business is to get to know your counterparts who are trying to do business in China, and then go back and make sensible recommendations to your own governments, recognizing the responsibilities that they have for security, both national security, economic security, the concerns for separate policies like human rights or others in China, and then allow business to take place. And if we do that, I think we can move forward. Now, I would say that the trend for the past couple of years in terms of U.S.-Chinese relationships has been tougher and tougher in the overall rivalry, national security area. It certainly is going that way, has been going that way in the United States. And from what I read about how it's going in China, the same sort of thing is going on. You don't make popularity points either in Beijing or in Washington by being soft on China or the United States. You know, that's just not a winning formula for any government official or person to take. But I have a feeling that perhaps that worsening of relations from the national security sector may have bottomed out 6 months ago, 4 months ago, something like that. And I see a little bit of a realization dawning that we can't go down this road of increasing rivalry, increasing distrust forever. We're not going to come to a war between our two countries. That's just a disaster for both. Ukraine is only the latest example to show that once the fighting starts, there are only relative losers. There are no pure winners. So let's not go down that direction. Let's think about how we can have this rivalry, but still have big areas in which we can cooperate. And if we do that, if we do improve, then I think that your Chinese companies who are investing in and operating in our country, the American companies that are investing and operating in China can, as some of our previous speakers have said, make life better for the citizens of both countries. And that's a good mission that we should all undertake. Thank you.
Thanks. So, Admiral, I'm going to follow what you were saying. I agree that the situation is getting worse, not getting better. And although, today DC is pretty hot. We walked from another restaurant here. It was hot. But the real temperature here is very cold. Let's just be honest. So, but I think you have a very good point. The point is that, it is our job. It is our own future. It is our own destiny. It is our own business that we need to do what we can to talk to our partner, talk to the government on both sides, and to talk to everybody, say how we can be more rational, more consistent, less political, more business. So this remind me actually, Governor, I read your famous speech in 2018. You invent a word called G2 versus G2 billion. So I actually wrote it down. So I'm gonna ask the question based on that. Your statement is that we do not need a G2 leaders to make decisions as much as we need a G2 billion people to take actions. So the G2 billion means, if I interpret it correctly, means that the US-China people need to come together. So that's, if you round it up, it's a 2 billion people here. So that's very good. This is a very, very, very good point that, we need to do what we need to do. But on the other side, I would say, again, I try to collect the questions from our members. And the reality is that there is a lot of fatigue here. And people are getting very tired. People are getting tired of, use your word again, doing more but getting less. People are getting tired of only getting the bit, not the better piece of the investment people made in the United States. So, from that point of view, we have morale issue here, first of all, morale issue here. So I know you're not a psychologist, but you're a good cheerleader. So I would like to talk to our audience and see if you can cheer everybody up. And, what we really want is when people leave DC going back to their hometown, they should feel excited. They should feel engaged. They should be willing to write a check for the local economy, which is good for everybody. So now, please, Governor.
Sure. I don't consider myself either a cheerleader or a psychologist, but I am a student of history. And John Kennedy said more succinctly than I did about the G2 billion that humanity is the same the world over. He said it in the context of both sides of the Cold War. Humanity is the same the world over. John Lewis said we all share this tiny little blue space capsule of life called Earth. And therefore, at a time of threat to both countries, I'm talking about climate, there is an opportunity there that really only the United States and China together, that G2 billion, can solve. And I believe that that is a cause that's worthy of the greatness of the long arc and civilization of the people of China, as well as the principles and the ideals upon which this diverse country, the United States of America, is founded. So that's what I mean by that cooperation. I traveled to China not so long ago, not after this last presidential election, but after the election of 2016 with the East-West Institute. And I was there with a bipartisan group of American former elected officials and also business people. We met with members of the Communist Chinese Party. We talked about how we can create this win-win situation. Over dinner, Song Tao asked me through an interpreter, he said, "May I ask you a question without intending any offense?" And I thought, oh no, he's going to ask me why Bernie took off and I didn't. And I said, "Sure." And he said, how is it that Americans seem to have become so afraid of the future when that seems to run against everything we thought we understood about the American character? I had been out there in Iowa in little towns that saw their manufacturing jobs leave. They went first to Mexico, then they went to China. They were told by leaders of my own party, and I am a Democrat, that this trade deal was going to be good for everybody. It wasn't good for that little town in Iowa. It has never recovered since. And we on this side of the globe did a very poor job on what policymakers in the past referred to as trade adjustment. That is, creating the skills, the workforce, the counterbalance for the jobs that we were losing so that this was not a, in your words, a win-lose proposition. We need to do better on that score. And at the same time, China needs to do a better job of focusing on those areas of mutual collaboration where there is less friction, where there is less fear of having business secrets, intellectual property stolen, or broadband tapped. Those two areas, as a student of history that I see, are in healing this world, the winning energy of this latest industrial revolution, renewable energy, and also biotechnology. There are mutual gains on both sides of that. All of us saw during the pandemic just how vulnerable our own supply chain was when it came to providing basic protective equipment for our doctors and our nurses, our first-line responders that needed to protect against this. There are things that we can learn from one another, not only about supply chain, but also about developing cures. And I believe that those are two areas. You know, China is one of our, for Maryland, China, I think, is one of our top three number three trading partner with the Port of Baltimore. A lot of Americans believe that trade diminishes their economy. I was fortunate, given the storied history of Baltimore, that a lot of people in Maryland understand that trade creates jobs. We were the first state to actually enter into a 3P partnership so that we could build right away the larger cranes to accommodate greater rather than lesser trade with the world, including China, and shipping companies like Evergreen. That was our bet on the future. That was our bet that people could see, but people didn't understand it by itself, you know? We depend on leaders to put together the stories with real pictures, real people in hard hats, doing real work, creating real jobs on both sides of the Atlantic. And that's what I believe we need to do a better job of in order to tap the potential of the G2 billion to save this planet and to heal humanity.
Thank you. Yeah, so I would agree 100% that, one of the frustration we have, or where at least that we see from the business world, is that the lack of true communication. And even that is a debate, arguing, that's okay. But if we just talk to ourselves, the ambassador today mentioned that like our chamber, it should not be just as a club, just talk among ourselves. We need to really come to the community, come to the society, come to everyone to explain what we do and how we do it. And so for Maryland, just one number, 2021, the exporting to China from Maryland increased by 88% compared to 2020. So that's a Chinese lucky number. And so we will see. There's a few, we have several of our members are investing today in Maryland. So after today, they're going to follow up with you.
I'm no longer in government.
And to see how we can furthermore to encourage those investment in the local community.
May I add one more sector, Pin, that I neglected to mention, and that is agriculture. And the tremendous opportunities that on both sides of the globe when it comes to advancing trade in agriculture and the development of sustainable agriculture. So that's another place, I think, along with those other two.
Sure. So now question to Dennis. And you talk about national security. obviously, this is a very interesting, very sensitive topic, no doubt, you know. I remember when we started the business, and my most frequent visitors was FBI. Every quarter they came, but you know, no negative. I mean, they were very nice, very professional, and they just asked questions. So when you talk about reality today, that reminds me about 10 years ago. I recall at that time, we were looking to buy a very interesting USA asset called A123 battery. A123 has DOE funding for $250 million. A123 has a government contract, military contract. In fact, CIA used that battery in Afghanistan. And also there was an election year. So, you know, obviously we got on the newspaper almost every day, New York Times, Washington Post, everybody. So the same slogan at that time, not much different, you know, from today, is that look at those Chinese are coming here stealing American technology, stealing Americans' taxpayers' money, and you know, so on and so on. So I remember at that time, Admiral, you know, I haven't said thank you to you publicly. Now it's a time for me to say that. You know, thank you very much. So at that time, I just want to give people a background. And you, as a former Director for National Intelligence, in charge of 16 national intelligence agency at the federal government level with, I think, a $50 billion budget. You came out and wrote a paper, published, and say, those are nonsense. I'm not using your word, I'm just saying, you know, and this business need to be as a business. This deal should have no issue. So I remember at that time, you know, we have about 20 some senators, Congress people, you know, they were chasing down DOE, chasing down to CFIUS, chasing down everybody. So this is a very, very, very different voice, very different voice. So now my question is, what made you come out at that time to speak publicly against, you know, all that? And also from that on, you know, look at it today, because every one of us probably will run into those kind of situations anyway, one way or the other. But law is law, rule is rule. So I just want to see, you know, if you have any advice for our members, and if that situation come to, you know, any one of us, how should we deal with it? And how should we, you used the word navigation earlier today. So how we navigate through, you know, obviously it is complicated, it is a frustration, but we got it done, and we got done with success. Everybody was happy. So please.
Right, well, I think I'm better known as somebody who is critical of a lot of things that China and Chinese companies do, and intellectual property theft, and all that. But somebody brought the Wanxiang purchase of A123 to my attention and said, listen, this is a good Chinese company, strong corporate citizen trying to do the right thing, and they need to be defended. And it was pretty simple. If I criticize some Chinese companies that I think are doing the wrong thing in this country, I should support those who are doing the right thing. So it was just really, and it was as simple as that. And then I met you, and that sort of reinforced my understanding of the nature of Wanxiang, North America. And so I decided, you know, I ought to come out and say it publicly. In addition, the company that was also trying to buy A123 was playing had dirty tactics that, I mean, Johnson Controls, I'll say the name right here. They tried to use the fact that you were a Chinese or a North American subsidiary of a Chinese company to say that that's a that's terrible. We shouldn't do that. They were buying people and hiring lobbyists. It just made me angry that a Chinese company that was trying to do the right thing was being treated badly. So that was what lay behind it. I mean, you know, like all of us, I think what you remember is mainly, did you do the right thing when it was the right time? And I tried to, and I thought you were doing it, and everything I've seen since about your company and is good. So let's keep it out. You know, if I could add one thing, it's what gives me hope in the U.S.-China relationship are a couple of things. One, I think Americans and Chinese are incredibly practical people in the end. I mean, you read a lot about how China is this 1,000-year civilization that has this incredible subtle strategy and so on. I mean, I find in dealing with Chinese, you know, it's pretty practical. We laugh at the same jokes. We can be honest with each other. And I think a lot of the Chinese mythology about the United States is also similarly wrong, that most Americans are just trying to do the right thing most of the time. And I would urge you to look at how both the United States and China look from the outside and look from the inside. In China, if I read the Chinese press, the United States is this huge juggernaut, military, economic, ideological power that's jealously guarding its position of superiority and will allow China to take no step and is on this path with tremendous power behind it to stop China. Many of you all live in the United States. That's not the reality of the way most Americans feel about this country. We're worried about things. We're worried about the dysfunction of our government. We're worried about our educational system. We're worried about the bad parts of Baltimore as opposed to the prosperous parts of Baltimore. We are basically inside. We feel we've got a lot of work to do. We don't feel like some international giant who's trying to oppress people. Now look over at China. When you read about China here in the United States, it's this huge growing power that is determined to push the United States off of its position of protecting its interests in parts of the country, that it's doing everything it can to knock us down and so on. And yet, when I talk to people inside of China, China's worried too, mainly about its internal problems, the demographic problems, the pollution, the corruption, all of those things. So I would urge you to sort of look at how these two countries look from the outside and from the inside. And I think part of my reason for optimism is this practicality, which lies, I think, deep in the character of both Chinese and Americans, which will figure out, wait a minute, the reality is we need to solve our own problems. The reality isn't, we shouldn't be spending all of our time thinking about how to crush another country. We've got far more important things than that to do. And I think this will penetrate through the American system. Of course, in our democratic system, and the governor knows much more about it than I do, it's much more unruly, untidy, raucous. But I think we're going to figure that out. The Chinese system, with the Communist Party being in such tight control, it's just the system to work out problems like that is much more controlled. But you can't control that forever. The fundamental problems that China has got to deal with are going to have to be faced by the government, and Chinese citizens are going to have to eventually do that. So I think that the weaknesses we feel within our countries that need to be fixed are going to keep us from spiraling up this confrontation to the point that it results in actual war or extreme violence. And I think the practicality of our people are also going to let us know that there are huge areas in which we can work together if we're consistent and honest and call what's right and what's wrong to the benefit of both of us. So I think that's the way forward. But it's individuals. It's you and you and you. You know, it's not some big impersonal force.
May I follow up on something that the Admiral said so well? There's a story told about a prize fighter who's in the ring, and the other guy's beating the bejesus out of him, and the bell rings after the first round, and the trainer sits him down, and he gets his attention in his dazed state, and he looks him in the eye and he says, "It's not what the other fella's doing to you. It's what you're not doing for yourself. So no other nation forced the United States Congress not to raise the minimum wage for 17 years, which is a great cause of the fear of the future that Americans have had. Those years, that was the first decade where real American wages actually declined rather than rose since the Second World War. No one in any other country told the United States or forced Congress not to make proper allocation of effort and dollars to trade adjustment after NAFTA or other trade agreements. Those were things we failed to do for ourselves. And no other country has put shackles on the United States to prevent us from seizing the opportunity of climate change for the job creation that can come from a new type of energy grid that is digitized, decarbonized, democratized, and distributed. So these are all things we should be doing for ourselves. When any business from another country invests in the United States, it is important that they do so in a way that communicates that this will make wages rise, that this will create jobs, and not jobs that you have to go out and get 3 other jobs to supplement. I'm talking about real wages, living wages, and I believe that desire is super strong among all of the people of China as well.
Thank you. So, yeah, so I think that's a good advice in terms of, let's focus on the fact, let's focus on being a good corporate citizen, let's be transparent. Let's do what we're supposed to do in the law, by the rule, and then, let the lawyers worry about what they need to worry.
And remember that our economy is not money, it's people.
Yes.
It's people.
Sure. Now, talking about people, I have a small quiz for you, Governor.
A quiz, only.
Yeah.
All right.
Candace, is Candace here? So she's the real boss for this chamber, okay? So when I mentioned to Candace that the governor, will join us for this panel discussion, she was extremely happy. So now, guess why?
Because, is this multiple choice or is it?
Okay.
Because she lives in Maryland? Because
Getting
she
close.
had the good sense to vote for me 3 times?
Okay, now, she's from Anhui province.
Ah, Anhui. Okay, cool.
So now, when Governor talking about, Governor Hughes was in China in the 1980, 79, 80, when right after China, USA established the diplomatic relationship. Governor there was to establish the sister-state relationship with the Anhui province. And then 1996, Maryland was the first state to establish the trade office in China as well. So thank you. And so I'm going to ask the question from what you were talking about, Minister Song Tao. Peter, do you know who Song Tao is? He was the minister from Zhonglianbu 部长. So from Minister Song Tao's question, talking about, I mean, it's very interesting, you mentioned that. And so both of you are representing a successful American dream, right? So, but I have a concern, just as you called, what is the character of the United States now, right? Obviously, it looks like, we do have those challenges, those mountains in front of us, but internally, we do see more and more those kind of division, we call United States of America. Now, it doesn't necessarily look like that, at least. So, looking forward, obviously, whatever past is past. But looking forward, And I think we all have a common sense that we would like to move the G2 together, move the two G2 billion together, move the world together as well. But on the other side, you know, the reality is that it is getting more and more difficult. For example, free trade. I think if I read one of your article correctly, you talk about, you know, those are free trade, bring in benefit, and also bring some, you know, some at some cost.
Disruption.
Yeah. So maybe you should, you know, you can elaborate on that and to say, how do we seek those balance, not focus on just the benefit, or not only focus on the cost, but don't see the benefit. And then actually I have a follow-up question for Admiral as well on that one. So please.
There is a movement among all, you know, a relatively recent movement of corporate social responsibility and also ESG. These are ways to apply another lens to the business of doing business. In the past, we have failed as a nation to apply that same type of lens to the business of trade agreements. Trade agreements that lift standards of living, trade agreements everywhere in the world that promote the healing of this planet and the move away from fossil fuels to renewable energy, our trade for everywhere in the world are trade agreements that are good. Trade agreements that diminish the other living systems of this planet, trade agreements that diminish wages for people on one side of the agreement or another, are trade agreements that are not good, especially for the people that it diminishes. And we need to be cognizant of that. We need to be honest about it, and we need to address it with better actions. If in the net sum total of those trade agreements, there are mostly winners, but there are some losers, we should not enter into that agreement unless we take actions that uplift and address the harm that will be done to those that are losers in that agreement. And we need, in an era where now, because of information technologies and GIS, geographic information systems, we've never had better capacity as a species and for policymakers to model, measure, and map the impacts of human decisions in a dynamic system. And the global economy is a dynamic system. We need to bring those tools forward. We need to have enough trust in one another to recognize the merit of trade deals, the impacts of trade deals, and where and when they happen. Because as Eleanor Roosevelt said in a different context about the UN Declaration of Human Rights, she asked, what will this document mean in the small places close to home? We need to do a better job of defining what trade agreements mean in the small places close to home.
Yeah, so I think, you know, Admiral also talking about business as win-win situation. It is very correct that in any business, if you have a one party winning, one party losing, you're not going to make a deal. You know, it has to be some benefit to the both sides. There's no doubt. Unfortunately, we have, it looks like, at least right now, we have this tariff situation, and it's a lose-lose situation. And, you know, I think everybody is in agreement that, you know, it caused a lot of headache to quite a few of our members because with those unpredictability, very difficult for them to, you know, to look at how to budget their business plan. And also it does cause a lot of inflation for the, you know, average American families. So this question is to Admiral, you know, through your crystal ball, any color or any prediction you have in terms of a rolling back? You know, I mean, this is being very hot topic on the newspaper. And clearly, Secretary Yellen has a little different view from the USTR. But just want to take your reading on where we are really. Is that going to happen in July, or would it could happen in the near future?
I think that just as the governor said, our policies were slow to recognize the very concentrated pain of trade agreements on specific areas. And they were far too captivated by the macroeconomic measures that everybody benefits from it. Excuse me. When it rings in your hearing aids. But anyway, so up until recently, economists would say, well, if we do this trade agreement, it will result in great gains for the American consumer. Prices of goods overall will be less. So every American family will have an extra $20 per year in its budget, and that adds up to umpteen billion. Therefore, it's a good idea. But as the governor said, that didn't recognize that although the benefits of that were widespread, the pain when a particular factory was closed was very concentrated and had enormous political effect. Now, I think we ought to say in fairness that the huge majority of jobs in the United States and in China are lost by technology. Factory jobs are lost by technology advances, not by international trade agreements. I mean, the relations are about 10 to 1. And yet, because you can't blame the technology interest on a foreign country, it doesn't have the political resonance that moving a factory to Mexico or to China has. So I think in the past, we didn't recognize enough that the gain was widespread and fairly thin. The loss of a trade agreement was very concentrated and very politically potent. I think that same psychology applies to tariffs, because again, in tariffs, the pain is fairly widespread and not so something from China being imported costs a third greater. Well, you generally have the ability to buy 2 of them instead of 3 of them, and family budgets can adjust to that. So the pain that economists tell us to the consumer about tariffs is fairly light pain, widely spread. Now, that there are exceptions for individual companies which rely on specific imports and all, but by and large, it doesn't have the damage and the political pain within the country that causes most citizens to object to them when you can say that you're using them for other purposes. So where does that leave us? I don't think there's a natural political adjustment that's going to take place to tariffs, that they're going to be just rolled back because Americans, the Americans are paying for that pales in comparison to what the increase in gas prices is now putting on the family budget, for example. So what are the forces that are taking it another direction? I think those people who follow it closely are realizing that non-tariff barriers and non-tariff effects are probably much more powerful than the individual tariff things. They are constraining business, they are raising prices, they are having the effects more than what the Customs and Border Patrol can collect. So you see in the United States, although the CPTPP has become a dirty word, you see the administration trying to come up with this Indo-Pacific economic adjustment, which is attempt in a more complicated, more bilateral fashion to raise some of the issues that TPP originally raised in terms of knocking down non-tariff barriers and trying to spread the benefits. So I think some of the intellectual climate is heading the right direction. Now, if I had a magic wand, I would put both China and the United States in the CPTPP. I think that would be a wonderful solution for both sides. It would really, but I don't think that's going to happen realistically. I think it's going to be a gradual process. probably done more on a bilateral and small regional basis with trade adjustment, much more imaginative and effective trade adjustments, Governor, than we've had in the past. I mean, basically, people have said before, it's retraining, right? But you know, retraining how, retraining where, all of that stuff has to be worked out. And there are not too many great examples of job retraining programs that have compensated for the loss. So I think some imagination on the trade adjustment. I think working not through a comprehensive Big Bang agreement like CPTPP, but in individual things will be the road back, and it'll be slower than it ought to be, but it will be in the right direction. So I think that's the, and of course, I don't know where things will go in China, but there are huge adjustments that have to be made there too. I saw a chart the other day that the average wage in China now is greater than almost anywhere else in Asia. So the Chinese handy labor pay advantage is gone now. So the Chinese advantages have to do with logistic infrastructure and state subsidies, frankly, for part of it. And those are going to be changing on China's part. So I think it's going to be gradual, but I think the fundamental drive of lower prices all around the world, better standards all around the world will eventually push its way forward, even though it won't be as fast and won't be as complete as we would like.
When it comes to tariff, as I was listening to the Admiral, it strikes me that there are kind of three intersecting circles when it comes to tariffs. One of them is the simple, easy to explain, but crude tool of tariffs. Oftentimes there's an intersection with national security interests. And then there is another circle, which is the subsidization of certain critical industries to a nation's defense on the other side of the globe by China. So all three of those can be entangled together, for example, in steel. Another example in this information age has to do with the subsidization of broadband and the networks necessary for broadband, which is critically important not only for a nation's defense, also critically important for an economy and in the whole tactics of belt and road policy all around the globe. You see, if you were to color in countries that are being subsidized by the Chinese government, that is seen on our side of the globe as unfair competition. But back to, so all of those things are at play. There's a reason why no policymaker has come up with a simple solution, and there's a reason why politicians gravitate to the simple and crude tool of tariffs, which I think which by my way of thinking, and I've now been promoted to the rank of citizen, so I can say whatever I want, I think are only justified when it comes to critical industries that the United States needs to maintain a manufacturing capacity in order to be able to defend itself and also invest in itself, which is back to the division. Historically in our country, we've gone through times of profound political division and polarization. I think perhaps our Asian neighbors in the world have a better understanding of the cycles of life than we do generally in the United States among just the folk culture and our people. That cycle of polarization was very acute in the War of 1812. I mean, there were Americans that would die literally at the polls from violence leading up to the War of 1812. And yet, coming out of that period of grave division and our country's invasion, and the last time that the Capitol was attacked and burned down, was a tremendous coming together that lasted until the Civil War. Profound division, lots of people died. And yet, during that Civil War, Lincoln nonetheless invested in the winning infrastructures of the Industrial Revolution of his time: telegraph, rail, communication. I said communications, communications, rail, energy, all of the things that came with that,
And canned food.
and canned food, Goober's peas. Under the category of the things we're not doing for ourselves that China has been doing in the last 30 years is investing in our nation's infrastructure. There's a reason, you know, in addition to the policies about not raising the minimum wage, in addition to not appreciating the impact of global economy and trade policies, there is also the failure to invest in our own country's infrastructure. Well, we need to do that, not in order to rob or, you know, another capacity from another nation, but it's just what nations do. Nations do, successful nations anyway, ones that raise their standard of living for their people, don't do that by locking a lot of money in a vault. They do that by creating and investing in solutions that are distributed, that lift up all.